Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, whenever you happen to be seeing this, I would like to introduce you to another book. I'm kind of obsessed with this particular gentleman's encyclopedias, and it is Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Crystal, Gem, and Metal Magic. If you have wanted to work with crystals or you want to dig a little bit deeper, this is a really good source. And he does a lot of really good reference and research. If you've watched any of the other videos that I've done discussing his kitchen magic or the herbs and things like that, you'll have an idea of how he works. But this one is fun because it goes through the powers of the stones and how the general concepts of them work. Then it talks a little bit about what magic is. For example, he says there's 3 necessities for magic to work. The need, so you have to want or need something. The emotion, how are you going to feel when you have it? And then the knowledge of how to conjure it, or command it, or summon it. And once you get those, usually things fall together pretty quick. And then there's he goes into a section, and then this is one thing that I do appreciate about him, and there's a few others that come out of Gerald Gardner's line that talks about this, and that is magical morality, meaning you want to do things the correct way, the ethical way, if you will. So he talks about, we practice magic to improve our lives and those of our friends and loved ones. It's performed out of love, not hate. It has to be in harmony, not in domination. So in that respect, I agree with him. I do believe that we have to learn how to manipulate the energies to what we're looking for, and we have to develop divine will. But in that aspect, it's not so much commanding it from an ego-based state, it's calling it into its natural state. This is what we want you to do. And so you go through this, and he talks about how it's not an instrument of selfishness, domination, pain, fear, or manipulation, or the ego, and then kind of talks about why, before you perform an action, what do you need to have to make sure that it's being in line with being a moral person? Because karma's not the greatest thing if you ever get it stirred up and angry at you. We'll just make that little announcement here. We go through what the different energies are with stones. There's positive or receptive or projective and receptive, positive and negative energies. Talks about some of the examples of that, like projective energies are electric, hot, the daytime sun. Receptive is magnetic, cold, nighttime, the moon. So you get an idea of what kind of energies are at play when you work with the different stones. And projective stones tend to work primarily with the conscious mind. They trigger the mental response. But you have the receptive stones, which kind of subtly slide into your subconscious. So if you work with a lot of these different energies, you want to balance the two. You don't want one stronger than the other, because then you're going to have one thought or one energy dominating the other. So it's all about working with balance. And then he goes into the basic colors, and just from personal experience working with manifestation and intuition and vision boards and things like that, and a lot of different crystal therapies over the years, if you can't find the one specific rock, like sometimes rhodonite is not just hanging out somewhere, but if you happen to have a pink stone, usually around where I'm at, it's pink quartz or feldspar or something like that. It's pretty common. You can substitute by color if you can't find the exact stone. I mean, it'd be nice if we could say this, but not everyone's going to have a, half a pound of diamond just sitting around their house, or they're not going to have the perfect statue of lapis lazuli. That's fine, but do you have a clear quartz? Because that'll work for diamond. Or if you have sodalite, if you have a sapphire. Sapphires are just basically really fancy blue stones. If you have something like that, those will substitute just fine for the lapis. Now, there are specific energies with each stone, but in a pinch, you can substitute by color, and he talks a little bit about that in here. And then it talks about the different shapes and how those can impact or influence or enhance your workings. A lot of the times with a lot of stuff that I like to do, I try to find raw stones, quartz crystals in its pure form. For example, I have, they call it druzy quartz, it's just not purified clear quartz. But this particular little guy I found out in the woods, and I've got a whole bunch of different ones like that that I use for different purposes. And I'm sure you may have seen one of those running around in my videos. But I also have things like the polished or tumbled stones. Like this was a very much not gem grade aquamarine type stone. And so you've got a little bit of movement with what you can have. One thing that I will say before we get into this anymore, if you're using them as like a Reiki practitioner, or if you're using them as someone who does gem therapy on a person's body, if it's going to be touching their skin, you're going to want something that's been polished or at least smoothed. They can be a little rough. Like this guy here, he's shiny, but on the back, very rough. I would not want that laying on my skin. But if you have, like, you're putting it on their chest and it's clothed, you can put whatever there as far as that goes. So, something to think about. The other part is where you can find your stones. There's there's some old lore going back, I don't know how many years or when it first showed up, but when I first started wandering down this particular path over 20 years ago now, there was this lore that kept coming up that there's certain things that you should never purchase. You should only receive them as gifts. One is your first and primary tarot deck. It should never be bought. It should only be received from your teacher or your mentor. A lot of your work crystals, like the ones you would wear around your neck, the ones that you work primarily with, those should be gifted in sets, is one of the things that I used to hear all the time. Nowadays you don't hear that as much, which it's a little bit harder to find those type of initiation experiences, which will definitely change how you look at a situation. I'm not going to say that the solitary is not an acceptable path, but there's something about being in a situation where you are tied to an initiation like that. It changes how you look at these gifts. So that's one thing that he slightly brushes on. It's not a huge topic for him, but he starts off straight up. There's some stones you're just going to have to buy. There's some stuff that you're not going to be able to find locally. You're not going to be able to find through trade. You may have to just go out and bite the bullet and buy the stones. But you can also like collect river stones. If a stone is attractive to you, that's generally a good sign. You can barter for stones, trading them back and forth, and there's a lot of groups you can do that with over the years I've ran into. But collecting them is kind of how I like to do it. If you haven't noticed in some of my stuff, I like to do my own orgones and different crystal designs like that. There's a fair amount of my stuff that are gems and semi-precious, mind you, stones that I have found around Idaho in my wanderings. So there's a few of them like that, and then there's other ones that I have picked up from other people who do a lot more intensive work than I do. So a lot of your, what I call the king crystals, the ones that are displayed in the center, a lot of those will have Idaho stones in them. So that's why I do that. There's a talk in here about how you cleanse your stones using the 4 elements, which is a way to, especially if it was a gifted one or if it was like through barter or purchase, you want to clean your stones just to make sure there's nothing else hanging out. Generally, when you find them in nature, you have a lot lower risk of that kind of stuff. Still good to clean them, but it's a little less necessary at that point. He goes into how you can use the stones for divination, kind of like casting runes, which if you cast runes, you'll kind of have a know we're casting the bones or something like that. Different stones can mean different things in different layouts. Not something I am super strong in. I've tried it a few times. It's just, it doesn't resonate for me. He then compares the different stones to the tarot, so you can actually use them as, like, if you get a bunch of the little ones, like you can pick up at some of the touristy destinations, you can actually set up a bag of tarot. So you pull out a stone and it has a very specific energy that aligns with one of the major arcana in the tarot, which is kind of cool. And then he tells you how to use that as a divination. He talks about jewelry, which is something a lot of us use, from general rings, like I picked this one up from an art show a few years ago. It's a little piece of agate, moss agate, to different necklaces. Some of these are not quite finished of mine, but they're used the Idaho stones in them. Focus or not. But there's a bunch of different ones that you can use in different ways. You can kind of hide things in plain sight by just using jewelry. He talks about the different basic spells you can use for them, if you like to use the term spell. If not, you can use the term intention or manifestation setting. And then he actually gets into the meat and potatoes of the book, where we get into the stones themselves. He goes through, like he's done in other ones, Apache tier, what's its energy, what's its dominant planet. Sometimes there's more than one planet, but for the most part, most crystals and stones and even metals are going to ascribe to one planet, and anything else is secondary. So just when we're looking at it, the first one is generally the primary. Then he goes through what is your elements, which right up my alley. And then he talks about what are the powers. So what is the primary function of these stones? For example, Apache tiers are luck and protection. And then he goes through traditional uses, and this is where it gets a little bit more paragraphy. Like that's aquamarine is the next one. It's 2 pages. But it's tells you what it is. Apache tiers, a globule of translucent obsidian. It's a good luck charm, protection, and basically anything else that's ascribed to obsidian. So he kind of cross-references a few things in here, so you're not like, well, what else does it do? If it's obsidian, shouldn't it do? Yes, it will do that too. So he goes through and describes a bunch of this stuff, and it's like crystal quartz. There's pages. I think there's 5 pages, 6 pages on just quartz. But he talks a little bit about colors, what different styles, different shapes, because quartz is not just clear. He references blue quartz, green quartz, Herkimer diamonds, which is a quartz, rose quartz, rutilated quartz, which is the quartz that have the little lines struck through them, usually some other crystal or mineral that's kind of punctured it, smoky quartz, which is a fun stone to work with, and then tourmalated quartz. So you've got all these different styles of crystal, and he talks a little bit about what each one does, what the association is, and then you get into your colors, what do they mean. He even talks about the expensive gems like diamond, which it's associated with different metals, platinum, silver, and steel. And it's interesting, diamond's not associated with gold. Platinum, silver, and steel, much stronger and much more intuitive energies. And then it talks about what its powers are. Spirituality, protection, courage, peace, healing, strength, obviously strength. So you've got a lot of different ways to look at stuff. He even talks a little bit about fossils and what their folk names could be. Sponge, witch stones, ammonites, snake stones, draconites, that's a new one. And with fossils, they don't fall under one element. They fall under the akasha, which is the 5th element. So you've got all of these different ways of looking at the stones. It talks about geodes and garnets. Then this one actually is really helpful, especially if you're kind of a amateur rock hound. He goes and there's a section in the middle that has color plates for kind of basic ideas of what the stones would look like. Some are polished, some are not. So if they're polished, it makes it a little more difficult to find them in the wild. But he's got all of that, and then towards the end, this version that I have, which is the one I'm linking in the description, also has the updated information, because he ends with zircon, but after the first publication, which is, I think this is the 2nd or 3rd that I have, they added danbarite, kyanite, vandanite, and ulexite. And the only one out of that I actually have is kyanite. The rest of them, no. But he then moves into the metals, planetary metals, which, fun fact, if you are wanting to get a little more curious as to alchemy, understanding each of the metals and their planetary associations is pretty big. It's like a very huge part of alchemy, and I'm talking the actual genuine stuff, not the self-help version of it, when we talk alchemy, we're not talking about, oh, it's a simple meditation. That's called meditation. When we talk about alchemy, we're talking about lab work that mimics what you're doing in your spiritual life. You can't separate the two in alchemy. It is a spiritual form of chemistry, and that's what it is. All the rest of that stuff is mindfulness, self-help. Those are great, don't get me wrong. It's not alchemy. And so we get into the planetary metals. And the reason I say that is in alchemy, you go through 7 stages. Saturn to the sun. Saturn lead, sun gold. They talk about that. Saturn is lead, Jupiter, juniper. Jupiter is tin, Mars is iron, Venus is copper, Mercury, obviously Mercury. Moon is silver, and the sun is gold. So when you know that scale, that helps you understand a lot more of what they talk about when you're going through some of the old alchemical terms or some of the old phrases, because they would hide stuff. It was a very secretive science back in the day. He talks about which elements rule which metals, and then it's kind of interesting because he talks about aluminum, which aluminum is not a safe metal, and I will die on this hill. He even talks about aluminum foil, which should be banished from every kitchen in the world, can be a tool for image magic. You can mold it really easily, which is, to me, its only functional purpose. And a lot of people in the modern world have started figuring out metal for certain things, especially aluminum. You don't want that in your deodorant. You don't want it in your toothpaste. Why are you wrapping your food in it? If you don't know why I'm against it, take a piece of metal and put it, just aluminum, put it on top of some tomatoes, that are like an open can of tomatoes. Just dump some in a bowl and put a piece of aluminum in there. Check back in the morning. Where's the metal? Same thing with a lot of your roasts. You'll always burn holes through it. It's not burning holes. It's absorbing into your food. So aluminum, not the greatest thing. And he references it like it's fine to use for magical purposes. Don't use it in your kitchen or on your body. So, but he even goes into like antimony, which is actually a poison. He talks about some of the brand stones, and I say that because there's actually a company that makes these, which are the Baji stones or the Boji stones, and that's a trademarked product. He talks about those. He talks about brass, copper, electrum, which is a really interesting looking metal, gold, iron, lead. If you have fairy problems, iron's a good one. Lodestone, magnets, natural magnets, and then where else we got? Mercury. It's dangerous, not as dangerous as people think. Meteorites, which are so cool, and then you have pyrite, silver. He literally goes through, I think, all of them in here. And then in the back, he does, and I love this, you have a specific purpose, look to the back. What kind of stones do you need for projective energy? Well, you got those. What do you need for receptive? Well, there's a list for that. The planetary stones, Sun all the way out to Neptune and Pluto. What happened to Uranus? He didn't put in Uranus. That's not good. Oh well. But he does have Neptune and Pluto, so there's that. Which elements rule which stones, including the 5th element, which is the Akash or spirit. And then this is probably the one that you'll use the most. Magical intentions. What are you trying to build? Beauty, gardening, longevity, money, wealth, and prosperity or riches, protection, travel, wisdom, and then, and I'm telling you, this man, magic and Wicca was his life. This is what he did. He studied everything. He has magical substitutions. If you can't find a certain stone, you can always find a substitute. So he has a whole list of those. He also has your zodiac birthstones. Something's going outside. My neighbors are tapping. He also has a few places in the back where you can look up to purchase different stones, places that he liked. I have a few that I like to order from as well. If I'm going to order them. But overall, this is an awesome book. I highly recommend it if you are interested in crystals, stones, gems of any form, or looking to start into some metal work or even alchemy. This book is really super helpful. it is by no means have everything, but it does have everything you're going to need to get started. So, like I said, I'll link it in the description if you're interested. I highly recommend it. With that, I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of your week. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video, comment, let me know your thoughts, feelings, and impressions. And honestly, have you ever worked with any of this one or of any of his other encyclopedias? I'm interested to hear your experiences if you have done that, if you're comfortable sharing, obviously. But with that, we'll let you guys go. Have a great rest of your week.